And now time for the podcast that will forever be your hall pass. Welcome back to Motorsport 101.
You know what? I've got to let them have that one. I wasn't expecting that, but fair play, you can have it. Hi guys, welcome to episode 504 of Motorsport 101. I am your friendly neighbourhood host, Dre Harrison. Glad you could join us as ever. And it's time for what I like to call the final part of our hat trick of beatings this weekend, because we have plenty of beatings over the course of motorsport over this week. We had Max Verstappen dominate in Saudi Arabia again. Francesco Bagnaia reminded the world that he is still him on two wheels. And IndyCar got its 2024 season underway in St. Petersburg this past weekend. And oh no, Josef Newgarden's back. That's going to be a problem for everybody involved. So we'll talk a little bit about that, some of the other little stories that came out of St. Pete, and Michael Andretti saying some shit, because that's always fun. First of all, we've got Mr. Cam Buckley back for another round. How's it going, Cam?
It's going pretty good. You know, we actually forgot to include even, further beatings because in series we don't even cover, a second consecutive Jet Lawrence win has hit the KTM Massive.
Oh, God, another one? Shit.
Yeah. As it turns out, the only thing that can really stop him is himself and genuine acts of God. Good luck to friend of the show, Ryan Eric King, on that one, because it's Jover. He's unstoppable.
Yeah, I'm not normally a big motocross guy, but I've been watching the races that have been replayed on our Discord server, and holy shit, that guy's special. Good lord, that is definitely a thing to keep an eye on if you're a fan of two-wheeled motocross action. Pato Shabatti, good luck over there with Ducati. I'm just throwing that out there because you've got a weapon on your hands to beat, but there is a third seat there, and it's not from RJ O'Connell. We have a guest on this week's episode. He's been asking for quite some time to come back on this show, and I finally caved and gave in, which is a good sign about his unhinges. You might know him from years past on the show. He now writes for Frontstretch again for the 2024 season, and he's our resident IndyCar bastard. Our friend and yours, Christopher DeHarde, is back on the show. Hello, Chris. How's it going?
Pretty well for the most part. Spring is starting to come by in Indianapolis a little bit. Fortunately, my Dallas Stars gave up a 3-goal lead last night against the Florida Panthers. Ooh. But at least on the bright side, they're leading their division in the Western Conference, and I'm planning on seeing them next month. Although, in closer news, the Indy Fuel are having Indy 500 night in a few days' time from our recording of this episode, so looking forward to spending a Saturday night at the Indiana Farmers Coliseum at the State Fairgrounds.
He couldn't help himself but get one little Indiana plug in there somewhere within the first
Indiana mentioned.
Indiana mentioned. I'd expect nothing less from you, Chris. But yes, he's very much here to help us fill in the blanks on a lot of IndyCar's opening weekend in St. Petersburg. And we'll crack over some of that. Also, Michael Andretti was very vocal and very, shall we say, scathing in regards to the politics within IndyCar at the moment. A lot of comments made about Roger, his ownership of the series, where the series is going in general, and their upcoming potential engine drama that may or may not happen with Honda's future in the series, very much on their knife edge. So there's a lot of interesting stuff to unpack in the next 45 minutes or so. But I'll quickly get the housekeeping out of the way. Places you can find us real quick. We're on Twitter, aka Elon Musk's failed business investment, at Dre Harrison 101, at C Buckley 917, and C DeHarde, DEHARDE. Give him a Motorsport 101 bump from us and tell him I sent you. You can check out the website, motorsport101.com, if you want to read all of my written thoughts on all of this past weekend's action in Formula One, MotoGP, and IndyCar as well. And if you really like us, you can back us financially on Patreon. Patreon.com/motorsport101. You can back us there at the $5 level to get early access to all of our episodes. You can upgrade to the $10 level if you want to listen to these episodes live as they're being recorded and get shout-outs on every show we record, including one Jason who's in the audience right now watching along. Thanks as ever, Jason. So, without further ado, let's get into IndyCar Season Opener in St. Petersburg.
Who needs a bus, bro? I want to orbital strike Dre's house for writing that. Honest to God.
Yeah. Okay. I may or may not have written that in the script.
That's all time. That's all time bad.
Am I wrong?
Josef Newgarden dominated, obliterated, shelled the field in the IndyCar opener in St. Petersburg, winning effortlessly from pole position by 9 seconds, leading 92 out of 100 laps, with a Chevy 1-2-3-4 sweep, followed home by Pato Award, Scott McLaughlin, and Will Power. Yeah, Penske went 1-3-4 on the day. That's a return to form from them. Is Josef Newgarden back?
I mean, you saw it firsthand, Chris. What did you make of it?
It was refreshing to see him actually do well in road and street courses for a change. And I say that not trying to be a bit of a Debbie Downer, but Joseph's form of road and street courses hasn't been what it was previously. His last street course win was Long Beach 2022. His last road course win was Road America that same year. That's when he won the $1 Million Challenge and spent a lot of it at McDonald's that night. The fact of the matter is that there were questions about his road course form. We all saw the Rolex 24, the GTP field. He was the third slowest driver in class, only being quicker than Romain Dumas, who was 1 month past his 46th birthday, and Ben Keating, who sells cars for a living.
With a lightsaber, I might add.
Yeah, and we know what he's capable of on road and street courses and on ovals. I mean, heck, he's won, 7 of the last 10 oval races, 8 out of 13, I think. He clearly hasn't forgotten how to turn right, but it's just something was just off for some reason, whether it's something outside of the car, outside of everything else outside of racing. But this was a statement drive for Josef, and the rest of the field should have taken a lot more notice, because it was very easy to write off Josef after last year with him only winning on ovals, nearly sweeping all the oval rounds. It was just easy to overlook him. But he won the pole, and that's when people should realize, he might be someone to look out for on Sunday.
Oh, the man who's won more IndyCar races than anyone else since the pandemic might be a threat. Yeah, I mean, it sounds silly, but to echo,
it had been a minute.
Yeah, you have to echo Chris's sentiments here that this shouldn't be a surprise, given we know how good Josef Newgarden is. For perspective, this is his 30th IndyCar win. He now has more IndyCar wins than Rick Mears, which is just terrifying that Josef has been consistently this good for going on 7-8 years now. This is incredible. But I mentioned this during our IndyCar season preview a little bit, and some of the interviews that he's had over the course of the weekend actually added further context to this. I actually loved the fact that Josef Newgarden dropped the Bus Bros show. He broke up with his social media manager and wanted to unfollow everybody on his social media platform so he could stop himself from doom scrolling. This is a guy that clearly was frustrated at how his 2023 went out, and it would be very easy for him not to do that, given we all know IndyCar prioritizes the 500 over everything else, and Josef won that race. You'd be understanding if you were like, I won the 500, who cares, right? But this is a guy that clearly was frustrated at how his 2023 form went down. And he's made big changes to his life off the track in order to facilitate this change. I mean, he openly said on Connor Daly's podcast this morning that he's introverted and a people pleaser, which, my God, that is not the most ideal personality combination traits that you want a racing driver to have. And that's quite fascinating in a sense. But he's made big changes. He was so slow at the Rolex that he's now been ruled out of Le Mans contention. Porsche's come out and said that on the record already, that Josef will not be driving one of their cars at Le Mans. And it's hard to argue against that logic because he's just been so good. But yeah, this was Triple Crown. This was Triple Crown Newgarden. The one that was winning on everything in 2022 and could win anywhere. This is the best of Josef. That was him taking a race by the scruff of the neck and just running the field over. It was incredible to watch in real time.
Yeah, I mean, there was no real challenge to him on the day. He had a poor first stop, and it didn't even matter. He just drove back to the net lead. And he seemed to be able to just eke out a gap whenever he needed to, irrespective of tire, irrespective of track condition.
It wasn't even necessarily the fact that he won by 8+ seconds at open air. It was even on that funky restart in the middle of the race where he had to, because Christian Lundgaard was off sequence because Pato punctured his tire on the opening lap of the race. We'll put that one down as a racing incident. But the fact that he was able to get back past Colton Herta and Lundgaard and show some, he called it killer instinct.
With relative ease.
Yeah. Made it look easy. And was able to get back to the front comfortably and then just, like, this is not just anyone he's pulling away from Pato O'Ward, one of the fastest dudes in the series. like the train behind him in the fight for second had Pato O'Ward, Will Power, and Scott McLaughlin in it. And Colton Herta was up there as well. Like, so these are 4 of the fastest dudes in the series on raw speed. And he's made them all look silly. Like, God, Josef was him. I wish that he was showing this more often. Because, would it be fair to say, Chris, if this is the Josef that we're going to get used to in 24, he's going to be right back in the title picture again, surely.
100%, but we also have to remember, you win your titles on your bad days. Last year, Alex Palou had this race as a bad day when he finished 8th. Throughout the first 2/3 of the race, I'm like, okay, he's 11th, 12th, then, oh crap, he finished 6th. Oh no. But a couple more points about Josef, if I may. What you mentioned, he was pulling away from Pato. I want to make sure that we have this 100% clear. Him and Pato were on the same strategy the entire race. They both started on primary tires. They both stopped on lap 28 to put on the alternates. They went from lap 29 to 64 on the alternates. Then they put on fresh primaries from lap 65 to the end of the race. And Pato was down by 7.9 seconds. Number 2 about Josef. Let's assume for the sake of argument that he wins at Long Beach. If he wins at Long Beach, he will go into a 4-way tie for 10th place on the all-time wins list with Elio Castroneves, Dario Franchitti, and some guy named Paul Tracy. That's frightening.
That's a pretty good who's who.
It's a first ballot Hall of Fame list of talent without any question. Yeah, those guys are great in that sense, truly great, and Newgarden's one of those guys too. It is wild that, like, it's just nice seeing him back again. The series is far more interesting when Josef's at the front, because he is such a captivating character. Not to mention Penske going 1-3-4 in remember last year when Penske only won 1 round on a road or street course last year, and they've already matched that this year, first time of asking, with a 1-3-4 finish. That is a good sign that Penske's back in the right direction.
Yeah, and they actually talked quite a bit after the race, and keep in mind, this was a Chevy engine, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they were very open that last year. They did not have the tool they thought they could fight with, especially in terms of fuel saving, in terms of drivability on road and street courses. And Chevy and Ilmore, who built the Chevrolet motors, basically got all the drivers around in a big circle of 20 to 25 and said, what do you need from us? And basically had a roundtable discussion of everything they need, because in a past couple of years, if you were in a fuel saving race, Pencil and a Ganassi win.
Yeah.
It's just that simple. And this was a fuel saving race, and Chevy had their best showing in a very long time. Remember, these engines do get developed every single year. They might be, about 12 years into this engine formula, there's always gains to be made, even if they're small. Speaking of Ganassi.
Yeah, we'll talk about this in a second, but yeah, I wanted to echo that point as well, Cam. Like, as I know, Joseph was very complimentary of Chevy after the race. I think the phrase he said was, "They gave us the whole menu." It was a way of describing his victory, which I did love in his post-race press conference.
Number 9 large, so on, double triple bossy deluxe on a raft,
etc. Yeah, five guys with all the toppings, please.
Roger ain't got the money for that.
Are you sure? I think Michael Andretti disagrees. More on that later. But I wanted to say as well, who else shined in the season opener to you guys when you were watching along? So I have a couple of names in mind.
Mentioned it a little bit. Chris did, but Alex Palou still has this knack of turning pretty mediocre weekends into a pretty damn good day, as Ganassi really were not that competitive. Dixon and Palou were fairly anonymous. Armstrong crashed. Simpson got crashed, if I recall correctly. Or was that the other way around?
Lundqvist. No, Lundqvist got punted by Grosjean.
Lundqvist got crashed. They're running too many cars, this team. They have to be stopped. And yet, despite not a whole lot to go on and causing a lap 1 incident again, probably a racing incident, probably more on Palou than it was on the victim.
Yeah,
Christian Lundgaard.
I don't think Palou did too much wrong, for the record. I think it was put down as a general lap 1 kind of tight incident at St. Pete.
Right.
We all know that place can be rough.
But he turned it into solid points. And again, Alex Palou's floor is just exceptional.
He's never gone well at St. Pete. Like, they pulled up his qualifying results for the last 3 years, and it was 10th, and 7th. He was 13th on the grid in qualifying. Didn't make the Fast 6 in qualifying. Normally one of his staple traits, and still finished in the top 6 because the last time Palou finished an IndyCar race outside of the top 6, also top 8, I should say, you'd have to go back to the 2022 season for that, because Palou is just that friggin' consistent that he's an alchemist. He just turns bad results and uncompetitive cars into good results. That's just what he does. How about you, Chris?
A lot of drivers gained a lot of spots during the race. Like, I did my column for Frontstretch that went out this morning. There were a lot of drivers that finished at least 6 positions above where they started. We mentioned Scott McLaughlin. He started 9th, finished 3rd. Palou started 13th en route to 6th. Rossi finished 8th after starting 15th. Kyle Kirkwood was 12th after starting 18th. Kevin Simpson was the top rookie in 14th. He started 23rd. Pietro Fittipaldi finished 15th. He started 26th. Graham Rahal finished 16th. He started 22nd. And Jack Harvey finished 19th. He started dead last in 27th. A lot of drivers picked a good day to have a good day in St. Petersburg. Now, we can always say, hey, there were some drivers that had mechanicals. They had some drivers that, you mentioned a couple of drivers that had the accidents there. The fact of the matter is that you still have to actually finish and turn in all the laps to actually make that work. And they did. They kept going.
Yeah. Will Power, I also want to shout out a good showing on a road course for the guy that used to rule the roost when it came to road courses, and it's been a little bit quiet the last couple of years. Very nice day in for it.
Yeah, you guys all mentioned valuable names. I wanted to give Felix Rosenqvist a mention as well. Fastest ever lap of St. Petersburg in round 2 of qualifying. Couldn't quite convert it into pole in where it mattered most in the fast 6, but it was on the front row. Maybe not quite enough pace to win outright, but a 7th place finish in his first race in a brand new team is very impressive, and it's the best result for a Meyer Shank since Toronto 2022.
I say in the past year that Meyer Shank has had as an organization, it would have ripped your arm off for that result. Especially as the one highlight of the year last year was the amount of views that Simon Pagenaud's possibly career-ending crash got. with that brake failure. So it's just nice. I'm still mad at Shank, the whole punish Shank scenario, but for those working within that team, that's a shot in the arm for a team that has had a dismal past 12 months.
Absolutely agreed. And Felix as well, a guy that was, I think, treated quite harshly at McLaren. I think he was teased a lot in the 2 or 3 years he was there. I think he was often used as collateral for Zach Brown, either going after someone like a Marcus Ericsson. We all know he publicly tapped him up last year. And we all knew when the Alex Palou contract drama was going down that if they were going to bring him into McLaren, that Felix was always going to be the scapegoat. And that can't be a nice working environment to be in. And don't get me wrong, Felix handled it with class and professionalism the whole way through. We saw his relationship with Pato O'Ward. It was lovely. And again, I love it. I love that after the race, there's a great picture on IndyCar's website of Pato O'Ward bear hugging him after finishing 7th, which was a very nice thing to see. They're the true bus bros of IndyCar, quite frankly. So I'm delighted that Felix was able to shine a little bit and get some flowers this race weekend, because Felix has always been a very talented driver. He's always been very fast. He's just never really found the right fit for him on the IndyCar grid, and this might be the place for him. With Shank not racing in IMSA this year, they've got more of their resources to put into the IndyCar team. I think Tom Blomqvist has got some pace in him as well. I really am crossing fingers and hoping that this is a good fit for Felix, because I think he belongs on that grid. I think he's good enough to be there, and I just think that he needs to find the right spot, and he might have found one here.
You know, I have to put down my axe, sue for peace, and shout out Rinus VeeKay.
Yeah.
He actually had a really nice race for Ed Carpenter Racing. Finished, 10th?
10th, yeah.
Top 10 for that team. It's been a little bit for Rinus to show the kind of pace that he did here.
Not even the fact he was 10th. The fact he was 10th and looked racy. It was nice to see that aggression from Rinus VeeKay again, but obviously not going over the line like he has done in years prior. But it was just nice to see him competitive and racy again. That was a nice top 10 finish from Rinus VeeKay. And also, before we move on real quick as well, shout out to Nolan Siegel in Indy Next. Beat the field over his knee in Indy Next on that one. That was a statement of intent from Nolan Siegel. I'm very excited to see how he gets on in that Dale Coyne car later on in the year, full time in the series. But I openly admit I was a big Louis Foster guy going into this season, preseason wise for Indy Next. But Nolan Siegel, mad impressive to dominate. Pretty much led the St. Pete Indy Next race from start to finish. Very, very impressive indeed. Miles Rowe in the top 5 as well at one point. As for a good chunk of that race was very impressive. And Louis Foster still looks fast as hell. So it's going to be a very interesting title fight down there as well.
Yeah, low key, I hope that on current evidence, that feels like it's going to be one of the better feeder series championships this year.
A lot of talent, a lot of high-end talent. And Nolan was quick last year, but if he's coming out of the box this year and driving like that, then that's going to be getting a lot of headline movements. But Dale Coyne, that might be your guy. Like, I'm just saying, you might cut him a check, get him into IndyCar full time. He's good enough to be here full time. And this is no disrespect to Jack Harvey. We love Jack on this show for obvious reasons. We're glad he's back and he didn't look terrible out there. But look, Nolan Siegel might be him. I'm just throwing that out there. So yeah, keep an eye on that. But
while we're in the junior levels, if you don't mind, Dre, we had Lockie Hughes and Nikita Johnson winning USF Pro 2000 this year. They won the USF 2000 races last year at St. Petersburg. They just basically did a repeat there. I also want to give a shout out to Max Garcia, who swept the weekend at USF 2000. He skipped this race last year because he was actually too young to race in the series. Last year, he was 13 years old at the time that this race took place. He's now 14, a few days shy of his 15th birthday. When I was 14 years old, I was playing with Legos. Now I'm 35 and I'm still playing with Legos. Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm 26. I'm still, and I just bought the Senna McLaren like a week ago. So
the rear tires on that car irritate the hell out of me. They should be a lot wider, and I did put that down in my feedback when I did the little QR code on there. I could not stop myself.
You'll see it right now on my Riverside stream. I'm 31 years old and I'm still collecting Pokemon cards, so there's no hope for any of us here, quite frankly. This is who we are now, unfortunately, and I'm old enough to be that dude's dad, which is just terrifying to me at this point.
Same.
This is who we are now. That's going to be a wild conversation to even think about, that we got people that have been born in like 2009 out here in 2010 in some of these racing cars. It's fucking stupid. I hate it.
I graduated high school before he was born.
I was in my final year of sixth form when that happened. It was not. I don't want to talk about that anymore. But
I can feel my bones scraping each other. Let's move on.
Yeah, I think I've got scurvy now that you mention it. Yeah. The other half of my set list was focusing on and we got to be that, people. We got to talk about IndyCar politics, because unfortunately Michael Andretti did something you don't normally see in IndyCar very often. He actively complained about the series in public. Yeah, that actually happened. There was contention between Roger Penske's leadership of the series and Michael Andretti, who called out Roger for not investing enough in the series. This was the response to the first talks about a charter system that wanted the teams to all chip in a cool $1 million apiece. Michael did not take this one. Apparently, according to Frontstretch, where I read this article from originally, Michael laughed that notion out of the room when it was proposed to him. He would later go on to tell the media, quote, this: "There are people out there willing to do it." This is regards to growing the series. "I think there's a lot of people on the sidelines thinking this is a diamond in the rough if you do it right. But what you need is big money behind it to get it to that level, and he's not willing to do it. I think he should step aside and let somebody else buy it. I told him, why don't you sell part of the series to somebody to use that money as an equity stake? You still keep that control, but take that money and invest it." But he doesn't want any partners. Now, there's a lot in this. I think it was the Indianapolis Star, and shout out to Nathan Brown, who did a fantastic job on that piece, laying it all together. Mentioned a lot about the engine supplier situation. They were saying they need to look at IMSA's model and beat the door down to saying, well, what do we need to get your engines in our cars, etc. It's a fantastic read. Again, go to the Indianapolis Star from Nathan Brown and read it. It's well worth your time. There's also been talks of meetings between the non-Penske-owned teams, the entire paddock, and fears that Michael's comments may drive a wedge between what's been deemed a new understanding between the owners and the teams. Because I remember you, as a basketball man, you know this. Like, this felt like a players-only meeting, because all the non-Penske-affiliated teams were at the first meeting earlier this year. Which kind of says to me, we don't want the big bosses to listen in on this, which was interesting.
There's clearly a divide, and I'm not going to say the nasty S word, in the presence of what's going on right now, but there's clearly a divide in opinion of how they want the series to be run, and it all ties back to the fact that when Roger Penske was handed the keys to this series, it was more or less on an agreement that it would keep things the same. And we are now years down the line from that changing of the guard. And there really hasn't been any money put anywhere but IMS and, certain aspects of running the series. And it shows. And it shows in things we've talked about already on the show. The fact that Honda wants out. There's no return on investment. And moving to the IMSA formula is all well and good as far as, cribbing their engines. But does an entity like BMW want to supply an additional series while they're having their own troubles over in WEC and IMSA? Would Porsche want to build? I mean, Porsche's had a fraught relationship with the Speedway and IndyCar in the past. Would they want to supply cars knowing that they have a fleet of customer cars worldwide that they have to support, in addition to their pair of factory cars on both sides of the pond? For no return on investment. It's return on investment. That is the key here. And what Roger has to be comfortable with doing is burning some money and either selling off a piece of the sport to someone who wants to inject that money into it, or inject the money himself. Because they've got to get some critical mass and momentum going. They're just spinning their wheels.
It's an interesting thing, because I know Chip Ganassi commented on this as well, and Chip was like, wait a minute, Roger got us through the pandemic, so he's kind of earned a pass with me on this one, which is it's a valid point. That the pandemic probably did screw things up a little bit in that regard, because it hit everybody at the end of the day. They had to run their flagship event without fans in 2020, which obviously did not help matters at all. So I can understand where Chip was coming from to a degree. But I want to ask Chris, who obviously is, in IndyCar,
sleeps, breathes IndyCar.
Can one entity own the speedway and the series and act in the best interests of both?
It's possible, but I would argue that it hasn't been properly executed, because there's no separation of this is good for the series, this is good for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. In some regard, it might be a better idea if Roger Penske were to sell IndyCar, like, heck, if Michael Andretti bought it, or Liberty Media bought it. Actually, if Michael Andretti bought it, that would actually be really interesting. But you think of all the partners that they have, and Dan Tauris, who's the Andretti global CEO and is CEO of Gamebridge, who has more money than God almost. Think of the money he'd be willing to inject into it, especially in the marketing aspect. I got a quote here from an Associated Press story from Brad Hollinger that kind of just shows like what some of the things that are kind of the frustrating aspects of this whole situation is. Hollinger says, you go to any race in the world in Formula One, and the second you get off the airplane, you know a race is there. Any race that we have, meaning IndyCar, you get off the plane and half the people don't even know that there's a race at the racetrack, end quote. That's one thing that I've been trying to figure out, like, what can be done to help, get more marketing. There has to be a lot more aggressive promotion. When you look at what's going on with Iowa, with Hy-Vee, now Milwaukee with Hy-Vee, and you look at Worldwide Technology Raceway. I'm sorry, I got to call it Gateway Motorsports Park.
Call it Gateway. It's fine.
Gateway.
When you look at what John Beashey and Chris Blair have done with that event, and how aggressive they have been with their marketing, and how those stands have been pretty full, if you're willing to put up the money, you can make things happen. What's the old saying? Scared money don't make money? Or you got to spend money to make money?
Chris, that might put IndyCar's current predicament into words better than anyone has.
Yeah, the phrase I believe goes. Yeah, the phrase I believe goes, "Scared money don't make none," and I think I think Michael talks a lot of sense. And honestly, first of all, I'm glad that someone with the clout of Michael Andretti has come out in public and said this, because I, as a Brit, obviously I don't have quite the level of access and intuitiveness towards IndyCar, because we just don't get the level of access here. I mean, IndyCar struggles with its international audience at the best of times. But I've always had this sort of vibe where if you speak ill of IndyCar within its closed bubble, you get dogpiled on certain places. And so I'm glad that Michael raised his head above the parapet and had a conversation about it, because he brought up, I think, a lot of very valid points. I remember one of our most heated recent episodes of this podcast was last year after Texas. A Race of the Year contender. It made our shortlist for 2023's Race of the Year on this very podcast. A 10 out of 10 IndyCar race. And when we spent more time talking about the lack of attendance and the fact that there was only 40,000 in the house in Texas, and that Pato had to buy tickets for fans to get a better experience than what the track was actually offering. And that when we looked at that as if a potential cry for help, given that, you just didn't feel like it was all that important that there was a race going down in Texas that weekend. The locals did not know that there was a classic going on in their own backyard, Cam.
Dre, if a 10 out of 10 race happens and no one's around to watch it, did it really happen?
It's a valid point.
And it's so emblematic of IndyCar's current struggle to, I think, just find a direction outside of the 500 and commit to it. You need to spend money to make money. Scared money don't make none. And the trickle into the sport right now, the lack of marketing outside of the 500, and the fact that they dedicate everything to the 500. It's not that the 500 isn't important enough to not focus everything on. It's that it doesn't need any help. The Indy 500 speaks for itself. This series, practically speaking, shoved 40,000 pounds of dynamite up its own ass over the 500 in the mid-90s, lit the fuse, and survived off the back of the 500. And by the skin of its teeth, no less.
I want to bring this up.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
All right, so just to kind of piggyback off of that, the fact that we don't have a race at Texas Motor Speedway, I've been wanting to bring this up for a while because we haven't talked about this on the show. So I have a list on one of my screens right here of the top media markets in America. All right. Number 1, New York City. Number 2, Los Angeles. Number 3, Chicago. Number 4, Philadelphia. Number 5, Dallas, Fort Worth. In those 5 media markets, you have one race, 1 points paying race for all 5 markets, and that's at Long Beach. You used to have one at Dallas, Fort Worth. Oh, yeah, that was Texas Motor Speedway. We don't have that anymore. You used to have Chicagoland Speedway. That was number 3. Not anymore. New York and Philadelphia, close enough. We'll call Pocono good enough for both. Not there anymore. Number 6, Houston. Used to race around the Astrodome / Reliant Park or as an NRG Stadium, wherever the Texans play. That doesn't happen anymore. Number 7, Atlanta. Oh, we used to have Atlanta Motor Speedway, but we haven't done that in over almost 25 years. Boston, number 8.
That didn't work out too well.
Yeah. Washington.
Hey, I got to hang out with Simon Pagino for like a half hour for that, and for that, it was worth it.
Washington, D.C., number 9. Well, that was close enough to Baltimore, so we'll count that, but they haven't been there since, 2013, I think, or 2012? Number 10, San Francisco. You used to race at Sonoma. You haven't been there since, 2018? Yeah, 2018 was the last time you went there.
18, I want to say, yeah.
By the way, Tampa Bay, St. Petersburg, they're number 12 on this list. Detroit, they're number 14. Where's Indianapolis? 25th, right below St. Louis, right above Nashville. Oh, yeah, Portland over here is 23. So you've got like the mid-range right there in the top quadrant, but nothing in the top 5 or nothing in the top 8 except for Long Beach.
And Long Beach did really well last year. Like, I remember we had Ruby Acosta on this show last year during that episode of Long Beach, and Ruby mentioned there was 75,000 on race day at Long Beach. That was a big turnout, and that's the paradoxical nature that I wrote about on the website, where I was like, if you read the numbers, St. Pete did really well. It was a record attendance for St. Pete for the series this year, and I think it was anywhere between 10 and 15% up on last year's record figure. So they're like, on a grassroots level, there is clearly something that is working. I mentioned before, apparently a lot of it was to do with the local promotion in the area and trying to advertise it more like a festival rather than, it's a race. Yeah.
Dre, they advertised it and people came. What a concept.
Yeah, and I mentioned this in my written article. Silverstone did this for their MotoGP race last year, and I know Silverstone was sweating over their MotoGP race in 2022 because that's one of the marquee races on the British on the calendar, the British Grand Prix for MotoGP. It's a top 3 or 4 market for them worldwide. They only had 41,000 in attendance when the F1 race did 150. Like, it was embarrassing that bikes got cleaned up that badly. So what did they do? They promoted it more like a festival, and last year they had 55,000. They got 14,000 more, which was a genuine 30% bump. That's a good return on their investment. IndyCar needs to empty the keg into marketing, because for me, and I've mentioned this numerous times on this show, for a single-seater racing product, it is the best in the world right now. It is absolutely, like, consistently the best single-seat open-wheel racing product on regular TV these days. It smacks F1 into the middle of next week most of the time. Part of that is by design, but it doesn't stop the fact that their races, generally speaking, are good to great, sometimes incredible. But you're not telling enough of the world that for it to matter. And, you know, Michael made the point that, like, he needs Roger to open up $100 million to make this series what it is. And I do wonder, is Roger's mentality, and I'm talking about Roger Penske here, obviously, is his mentality, I just want to have the best open wheel single seat series in North America? Or does he genuinely want to get after NASCAR and Formula One's market share? Because Formula One in America is vulnerable again. I don't know if anybody saw the Saudi Arabian TV ratings. It was under 1 million. There was a 40% drop from last year. Like, I don't know how much of this is people turning off the F1, realizing that Max is likely going to win. I mean, we joke about it. Max is what we talked about on our tapings yesterday. Max has won 40 out of the last 50, which is just terrifying. But does Roger genuinely want to try and take on the two big hitters in North American's motorsporting market? Because this is still a series where more people watch sailing in America than they do watch IndyCar. And, like, that is a problem for me.
I mean, he'll know all about what it takes over in NASCAR, considering he runs over there.
Yeah.
It feels like if he was gunning for their market share, he would be spending the dollars. And we know Roger has them.
Absolutely.
Man's a billionaire with a capital B. And yet, we talk about return on investment. Well, you need to invest to get return on investment at some point. And it's been an investment into IMS, again, all around the 500. The 500 rules all. But barely a trickle into the rest of the series. It feels like if he was gunning for market share, he would be more aggressive about it.
I don't think Roger can afford to just sit there and wait and hope the quality of the racing series and the word of mouth on places like Twitter will get him over the line, because that's not going to work. He's going to plateau at a certain point, because word of mouth only gets you so far. I've said it before. I don't think anyone has ever aggressively gone on Twitter, said to someone, hey, you're an F1 fan, what you like sucks, go watch IndyCar instead, is going to convince people to go over and watch it.
It's just gonna tell people, oh, I don't want to interact with them again.
Right. And I mean, Chris, I know you've been in our Discord server, and I know you've been very vocal about that issue in terms of the series and its marketing and what can be done. I mean, you've been to more races than the pair of us combined. You've covered the series on a media level. You've rubbed shoulders with a lot of the big name figures in this sport. If you had a sit down with Roger, what would you be telling him?
The biggest thing you have to look at is your demographics. The series did a fan survey a couple of years ago. I think it was a survey that said that Grosjean was the most popular driver in the series. The average fan, if my memory is correct, this is according to someone who no longer works for the series, the average respondent was a mid-50s white male. And you've got to look at someone who is 30 years younger than that to try and build up your future, because eventually that's all going to die off. In 2013, I was at the Freedom 100, the Hoosier 100, although I was at the Freedom 100 as well that year. But I was at the Hoosier 100. That's the USAC race that used to take place at the fairgrounds before someone decided in 2021 or 2020 that they were going to cover that track with limestone. At that race, I did not know if I was at a USAC race or if I was at a senior citizen center, because the average age of everybody there was at least in their high 50s, low 60s. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, there's a massive problem here, because I barely see any young faces. And I'm thankful that every photo I saw of Twitter, there were a lot of kids there. There were a lot of new merchandise being sold. But one thing I would highly recommend is we have to look at getting more of a big marketing push to get drivers into those markets where the races are taking place months in advance. We have an Olympic break coming up in July. We should be there. The IndyCar should have drivers in St. Louis, in Nashville, in all the areas where the season's going to come to a close, and bring show cars, have discounted tickets at those events. Hell, in the off season, don't just stop this when the season's over. In the off season, because you have 8 months in the off season. I'm exaggerating here, of course. Colin Herta and Josef Newgarden both live in Nashville. Why can't we get one, if not both of them, at every Tennessee Titans home game? Why can't we get Kyle Kirkwood at, he's from Jupiter. I'm not sure if that's closer to Tampa or to Miami. Whichever one he's a fan of, get him at those home games. Work with the Dolphins or the Bucks to get him at those events. Or don't stop at the NFL. Look at the NHL. The Predators, they're playing Nashville. They're on a real big hot streak right now. Does Newgarden like hockey? Get him there. Get him tickets. Get him selling tickets for the Nashville.
Get him on screen.
Yes, exactly. Hell, I mentioned the Indy Fuel earlier. They have their Indy 500 night coming up in a few days' time. That's where Marcus Ericsson actually unveiled the Indy 500 ticket for last year's race. Felix Rosenqvist was there as well. He sat next to my now wife in our seats. We actually, funny enough, I was like, "Oh wow, hey Felix," and Sarah was like, "Oh hi." So she sat next to him just to say hi and things like that. But I digress. The IndyCar has to be much more aggressive with getting their drivers out there. How many drivers live in Indianapolis? Why don't we have drivers at every single Indianapolis Colts home games? Sure, Tony Kanaan hit the hammer on the anvil before the game started. Connor Daly, he's big in Indy. He's the only driver from Indianapolis proper that has driven an IndyCar full-time in a recent sense. Get him there. How many drivers live in Indy? Get Rossi there, Pato, everybody.
I mean, Chris, to that effect, because I live up, obviously I live up in New Hampshire, and we do have the NASCAR track up in Loudon. 2 weeks before it was 1 week because NASCAR's schedule is hella condensed. Kevin Harvick was at my local Xfinity store promoting the Xfinity race. Literally about 200 feet away from the store where I work. And the crowd was insane over there. It works. Other series prove that it works. Get people into local businesses. Get people on screen. The local word of mouth, the local promotion feeds into major promotion, turns into major marketing, feeds into people with eyes on the screen. What's this IndyCar thing?
TV ads, radio, social media, everything. Newspaper, all four.
Every marketing playbook that you can think of. Work it.
They only do that for the Indy 500 winner, and that's the problem.
Exactly!
They only do it for the guy that wins the 500, and even then, I think Josef Newgarden was criminally underutilized when he won it last year. That's your marquee face of the series.
What did we say 2 or 3 years ago when NBC was working Santino Ferrucci's jock? And Josef Newgarden,
you've already got
your young American star right here, beating the brakes off the field. Use him.
Yeah, again, DeHarde makes a great point in our chat. Part of it is I'm wondering how much Newgarden wanted to do all of that, and as an introvert, as he's kind of talked about, maybe that played a role in that. But this is a guy that absolutely leaned into a lot of goofy shit to help promote the series when he was younger.
To counter that same point, remember the video of him just flipping off hats in Victory Lane a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Swap hat, on, picture. Swap hat, on, picture. For 5 minutes straight. There's no reason they can't just print up a couple ads.
Yeah, they've got more, like I said, they've got more than enough money and resources to really plunge into this series and take a proper crack at taking market share off the other sports they're competing against at that level. This is a series that should not be struggling to get a ratings pull on NASCAR's Xfinity Series races. Like, that's not acceptable for a series of IndyCar's quality, talent, personnel, etc. And yeah, I'm glad Michael ultimately opened that line of conversation and was trying to say, hey, the call might be coming from inside the house here in regards to IndyCar, because we've been screaming this, particularly me and Cam, from the heavens for the last 2 or 3 years now, and I'm glad at least one of the big team owners has come around and said, yeah, this is an issue, and I'm glad that it is being treated as such.
Other side of the coin, Dre, they also need a new car, because there was a sticker that was out before the race started. St. Petersburg was the 200th race for the DW12 chassis.
Yeah, I mean this current rule set. We thought the previous gen car, the IR05, was old when it was finally retired, and believe me, that I have a vendetta against that car for a number of reasons. But God, this thing is ancient compared to that, when it was like that was cycled out after 6 years.
Yeah, and it's probably
12.
And it's probably another reason why people are frustrated, because any engine supplier that's come in and is using antiquated technology, there's no getting around it. This is from the 2010s, the early 2010s.
Dre, if you're an engine supplier, if you're Honda, right? You just developed a brand new, because it might share the number of turbos, it might be a V6. If you change something as small as 0.2 liters of displacement, you got to redo all your bore spacing. You got to redo everything about how you burn the air and fuel. You develop a ground-up 2.4 liter V6. You have it on track. You're right alongside Chevy. And then a month later, a month after you have them testing on track, IndyCar says, actually, we're good.
Yeah, it's a
lot. What kind of
but
look is that?
It's not the best.
What kind of look is that for an engine manufacturer on the outside looking to get in? And we dealt with this a long time ago in kart, didn't we, Chris?
Don't pop off about it.
That when you start making unilateral decisions that affect those who are invested in your series, like Honda, like Chevy, like Dallara, to go to something, start developing it, and then shit can it after it's already on track, no one's going to want to burn the money for the chance that it never sees the light of day, especially when you have a proven track record of burning your partners on that.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to put a neat little bow on that, because we're already at 50 minutes, and that's kind of what I was aiming for here. But yeah, very interesting conversation and a lot of interesting food for thought that I think IndyCar should be considering. I'm glad that they've had a full, paddock meeting of the owners since then. Apparently, the rest of the owners claim that they're on a good page with Penske and the like after those conversations. I hope that continues. I know there's now a specific group that's trying to aim for ways to try and grow the series. Zach Brown is a part of that, and he is a marketing guru. So I think that's definitely an interesting call. Probably someone I would pick if I was in charge of something like that. So let's see what ideas they can come up with, and maybe if it leads to any potential growth 2, 3, 5 years down the road. We'll have to wait and see. IndyCar is back in 2 weeks' time, roughly from the time this goes out, for the $1 Million Thermal Club Challenge. Maybe by the time we actually get to that race weekend, the working class might be able to actually afford the ticket. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But we will cover an episode of that in 2 or so weeks' time. We are back in ourselves in a week's time. Hey, there might be a Formula E race. There might not be a Formula E race podcast, depending on how El Sao Paulo plays out this weekend. We didn't do one on Diriyah because, well, we just didn't find it particularly interesting enough to warrant a full episode. And hey, good news, gang. The in-race pit stops has been delayed again. Yeah, great series. It's going wonderfully in Formula E right now. It's going great. Yeah. So yeah, we'll see if it's worth talking about on next week. If not, it'll be most likely Formula One for the Australian Grand Prix. Chris insists on a quick question for the ending. Go on, Chris. You know you want to.
All right, so I want to bring the curtain back a little bit for the audience here. We're recording this podcast on March 13th, 2024. It was 4 years ago today that everything went from bad to worse and daily life changed as we know it. I want to ask both the two of y'all what your memories are of that weekend. One of the two things that you clearly remember about how everything just changed, because no matter how many years in the future we go, this will remain a pivotal date in our lives. This was when I was in St. Petersburg that weekend. Dre, if my memory is correct, you had just finished working the Cheltenham Festival at the bookies.
Mm-hmm.
Kim, I'm not sure if you were at your current place right now, but what are some of the memories that y'all have?
I was unemployed at the time.
So what are some memories that y'all have of that particular time, of how everything just went so crazy in the span of less than 72 hours?
It's a great question. For me personally, I was still in the bookies. You're quite right. You're absolutely spot on. I think the Cheltenham Festival was one that really got me, because this was the same week that Rudy Gobert touched those microphones in the NBA, and also the same day that Tom Hanks had revealed he'd had COVID and was being detained in Australia for that very reason. Him and his wife had gotten COVID, and that was like the first real high-profile celebrity case I can remember of somebody getting COVID. I was like, oh no, this is serious. And for me, I
read that at a McDonald's, and I was like,
yeah. And I remember the Cheltenham Festival was the last big sporting event in the UK before the world shut down. And I remember working that day, and I remember seeing, because the final day of the Cheltenham had 55,000 people in place. It was the last day of the Cheltenham Festival. For those who don't know, their horse racing is Gold Cup Day. That's the real big money race. That's the headlining event of the 4-day festival. And there was 55,000 people in attendance that day. And you could even hear the commentators saying, we hope this doesn't lead to anything bad regarding COVID. Less than a week later, Boris Johnson stands on a podium at 10 Downing Street and announces a national full-scale lockdown. Everybody because there was pressure on Cheltenham to call that thing off. But we'll put some hand sanitizer by the gates, it'll be fine. And I was watching that in my bookies, and I'm thinking, this is a super spreader event. This is a really, really bad idea. And like I said, less than a week later, at least it felt like the world stopped turning, because I remember the following Monday in my bookies, Paddy Power sent me a poster to hang in the shop window, and the poster read, "Sorry, we're closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We hope to see you in brighter times." I've never seen such a serious advertisement, because Paddy Power are known for being a jokey brand. So to see that poster in the mail, and me putting it in the group chat of all our Paddy Power shop managers, there was 27 of us in there. It was startling to see that. And yeah, that's my predominant memory, was one of watching Cheltenham go down and me thinking, this is a really, really bad idea. And within 2 years, 180,000 Brits would have died due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Cam?
We didn't handle it very well.
I remember having it. I remember the permanent lung damage that first bout with COVID gave me. I still have it. It still hurts right in here.
Jimmy Broadbent still has it as well. I mean, he's talked about it at length before as well.
So between that, yeah, I mean, we watched, I think it was King, RJ, myself, a couple other people. all watching that game where Rudy Gobert became the greatest defensive player and shut the entire world down by mockingly touching all the microphones. And then turns out he had it, and he had spread it to multiple people. Little did we know that basically helped destroy that iteration of the Utah Jazz. I remember Christopher DeHarde saying, there's no way they'll cancel Sebring.
A half hour after I got to the Tampa airport is when IMSA announced that they were postponing Sebring to November. Now, that particular time, I had booked an Airbnb to stay in Sebring, to stay in St. Pete for an extra day or two before going to Sebring. I had booked an Airbnb in Sebring, and I had booked a rental car to go from Tampa that I could pick up at the Tampa airport to go to Sebring. I had to cancel all that within about a 45-minute to an hour span. And I was thankful that Priceline was like, yeah, we'll refund you your money for this. Airbnb, it was the same situation.
Kind of a hell of a circumstance. Can you help me out here?
Yeah. And then I called up my parents on the Wednesday night because I flew out on Thursday morning. I called my parents on Wednesday saying, hey, if everything goes crazy, I've already requested off from, the store where I worked for about 2 weeks here to do St. Pete and Sebring. They're not going to put me back on the schedule. It's already written. Can I just fly to New Orleans to stay with y'all for a few days? They're like, yeah, sure, no problem. We'd love to have you over. Little did we know it, Friday morning, IndyCar cancels everything in March and April. And an hour after I hear that news, I'm on a flight to New Orleans, and I'm staying with them for the next several weeks, which ended up being about 3 months' time. I ended up actually getting COVID in January of 2022 when I was at the Chili Bowl that year, and I can tell you right now, that was rough. That was really, really rough. But I'm glad that got through that unscathed, but very, very lucky on that front too. But yeah, it just brings me back to that whole weekend, just thinking. I'm in a coffee shop. I've got Matt Weaver and Joey Barnes, two of my best friends in motorsports media there, and we're all just looking at each other like, NASCAR's going to probably cancel Atlanta too. They were just in California the previous week, and it was just one event after another. And the NCAA tournament, Formula One goes on hiatus. Just one, boom, 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 because that was the same weekend as Australia.
Yeah. That Australian weekend was wild in F1 as well. Seeing that
fucking disaster because no one could figure out. No one would take charge and go ahead or cancel the event.
It took the Victoria government stepping in to say no, you're not doing this, and for everyone to finally pack up their shit and join Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Räikkönen at the airport.
They were in the World Championship.
And still nothing but respect to Sebastian and Kimi for going, you know what? This ain't worth it.
It's not worth risking our lives over this.
If nothing else, at least with some of the drivers, there's a little bit more humanity in regards to thinking that maybe racing isn't the be all and end all that we think it is sometimes. And compared to the way it was promoted and the way it was talked about back then, it says a lot about where we're at now. And yeah. Weird that was 4 years ago, and 4 years ago we're out like this now. Genuinely fascinating way to wrap up a podcast, if I do say so myself. But
take care of each other, please.
We try, but that often is where the problems start, unfortunately. But we'll see you back for Formula One in Australia. We actually have an Australian Grand Prix again now. That's kind of refreshing, I suppose. Until then, I've been Dre Harrison. He's been Cam Buckley and Christopher DeHarde. Until next time. Sayonara. Take care.